The small town of Millstone, Texas, wasn't much to look at. A single main street, 2 diners, a broken-down movie theater, and endless stretches of dusty farmland. Most young people left as soon as they turned 18, chasing dreams in Dallas, Houston, or further away. But Jack Carter, 26, was still here. Jack wasn't lazy. He worked harder than most men in town, but life had a way of keeping him down. His father had died young, leaving him and his mother with little more than debt and a run-down farmhouse. Since then, Jack had done everything he could: construction jobs, fixing tractors, hauling hay. Still, every paycheck disappeared into bills before he even held the cash in his hands. Some nights, lying awake in his narrow bed, Jack wondered if this was it. If his entire life would be nothing but endless work and empty pockets. He had big dreams, dreams of traveling, of owning something real, of proving to the world he was worth more than just another poor farmhand. But dreams didn't buy groceries. The spark of change. One morning in early spring, Jack was out in the fields behind his farmhouse. The ground was still damp from last night's storm, and the air carried that rich smell of wet soil. He had borrowed his uncle's old shovel, planning to dig out a new irrigation ditch. He swung the shovel into the ground, the metal cutting into the dirt with a dull thud. Again. And again. But on the 4th strike, he heard something strange. A hollow clank. Jack froze. He bent down, brushed away the dirt with his hands, and found a patch of dark, greasy soil. He rubbed it between his fingers. It wasn't just dirt. It was slick. Oily. He raised his hand to his nose. The sharp, unmistakable smell hit him. Oil. The realization. Jack's heart raced. His hands trembled. He dug faster, the shovel slicing through layers of sticky earth. The more he dug, the more of it seeped out. Thick, black liquid, glistening in the morning sun. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at his mud-covered hands. Oil. On his land. If this was real, if it wasn't just some tiny pocket, this could change everything. But he knew enough to be afraid. Oil wasn't just money. It was power. And power attracted the wrong kind of people. Secrets in the soil. That night, Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flickering light bulb above. His mother, Margaret, poured him a cup of coffee. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "Just tired," Jack muttered. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. If she knew, she'd worry. And if word got out in Millstone, well, in towns like this, secrets never lasted long. So he kept silent. But his mind wouldn't rest. First steps into a new world. The next day, Jack drove into town and found himself standing in front of the public library. The place was nearly empty, just an elderly librarian behind the counter. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked. Jack hesitated, then said, "Do you have books on geology?" "Oil drilling." She raised an eyebrow but led him to a dusty corner stacked with old reference books. Jack checked out 3 heavy volumes, their spines cracked and faded. That night, under the dim glow of his bedside lamp, he began to read. The words were complicated, full of scientific jargon, but Jack forced himself to push through. He learned that oil in the soil could mean a small deposit, or a fortune. And either way, the moment someone else discovered it, he could lose it all. For the first time in his life, Jack felt the weight of a dangerous secret pressing on him. Testing the waters. To test his discovery, Jack filled 2 glass jars with the dark, oily soil and drove them to a junkyard outside town. There, he found Earl, an old mechanic who'd been working with engines his whole life. "What you got there, Carter?" Earl asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Jack opened one jar. Earl dipped a finger in, rubbed it between his fingers, then gave a low whistle. "Boy, this is crude oil. Where'd you find it?" Jack shrugged. "Just out in the fields." Earl leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Careful who you tell that to. People'd kill for this." He gave Jack $50 for the jar, more than Jack usually made in a day. And when Jack drove home with that money in his pocket, he felt something ignite inside him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just dreaming about change. He was standing at the edge of it. Trouble on the horizon. But Millstone was a small town, and small towns notice things. Jack bought his mom a new dress. Fixed up the truck. Suddenly, people started asking questions. His neighbor, Bill Turner, leaned on the fence one afternoon and said, "You come into some money, Jack? Been seein' you fixin' things you couldn't afford last month." Jack forced a smile. "Just picked up some extra work." Bill didn't look convinced. And Jack noticed, for the first time, two unfamiliar men hanging around the diner, watching him. He didn't know it yet, but the secret buried under his land had already started to draw attention. And once oil and money entered the game, life in Millstone would never be the same again. The next few weeks were the strangest of Jack Carter's life. By day, he still looked like the same farmhand who fixed fences and hauled hay. But by night, he was experimenting, digging deeper into that strange, oily soil, filling jars, and selling them quietly to Earl and a few truckers who passed through town. It wasn't much compared to what oil companies made, but to Jack it felt like a fortune. First taste of wealth. Jack had never held so much cash at once. The first thing he did was fix the old farmhouse roof, so his mother wouldn't have to put out buckets every time it rained. Then he bought her a brand-new stove. The look on her face when she saw it, like she was 20 years younger, smiling in a way he hadn't seen since his father was alive, was worth more than all the money in the world. But it didn't stop there. Jack got new boots, a second-hand guitar, and one night he even drove to Dallas, just to walk through a city where nobody knew his name. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't trapped. Still, he was careful. No flashy cars, no sudden moves. He knew Millstone too well. News traveled faster than the wind. Whispers in town. But no matter how careful he was, people noticed. At the diner one afternoon, Bill Turner leaned across the counter. "Jack, you ain't been workin' for me much lately. Heard you fixed that roof. Bought your ma a new stove. Where's the money comin' from?" Jack forced a laugh. "Just odd jobs, Bill. Nothin' special." But Bill didn't smile. He just stared at him with those sharp, suspicious eyes. And when Jack left the diner, he noticed something else. Those same two strangers he'd seen before, sitting in the corner booth, pretending not to watch him. They weren't locals. Their polished boots and slick jackets gave them away. A dangerous proposition. A few days later, those strangers made their move. Jack was loading hay into the back of his truck when a black Cadillac pulled up at the edge of his driveway. Two men stepped out. One was tall and thin, with slicked back hair. The other was heavier, his shirt straining against his belly, but his eyes were sharp. "Mr. Carter?" the thin one asked smoothly. "That's me," Jack replied cautiously. The man smiled, flashing a gold tooth. "Name's Frank Delgado. This here's my associate, Ray Boone. We hear you got something interesting on your land." Jack's stomach dropped. "Not sure what you mean." Delgado chuckled. "Come on, son. Don't play dumb. Word travels. You found oil." Jack's grip tightened on the shovel in his hand. "Even if I did, it's my land." Ray Boone's smile was colder. "Oil don't stay secret, kid. You got two choices. You can work with us, or you can watch someone else take it from you." They left him with a card, no company name, just a phone number, and a warning look that said this was no friendly offer. Pressure builds. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He paced the creaky floorboards, the card burning a hole in his pocket. He knew what Delgado meant. Oil meant money, and money meant vultures, men who'd lie, cheat, and kill to get their hands on it. Jack was just one man with a shovel. How could he stand against them? But then he looked at his mother, asleep in her chair, her silver hair catching the light of the TV. She had sacrificed everything for him. He couldn't let her lose the only home they had. If Delgado wanted his land, he'd have to fight for it. An unexpected ally. The next morning, Jack drove into town and walked straight into the law office of Rebecca Hayes, the only attorney Millstone had. She was 32, sharp as a whip, and didn't take nonsense from anyone. "Jack Carter," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Haven't seen you since high school. What brings you in?" Jack hesitated, then leaned closer. "I need to know, what happens if someone finds oil on their property? Who owns it?" Rebecca studied him carefully. "Legally, if it's on your land, it's yours. But the oil business is messy, Jack. People try to buy you out cheap, or take it by force. She leaned back in her chair. Why do I feel like this isn't a hypothetical question? Jack gave her a tight smile. Because it isn't. Trouble strikes. That night, as Jack drove home, he noticed headlights in his rearview mirror. A black car, following too close. He turned onto a back road. The car stayed with him. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then, bam. The car rammed him from behind. Jack's truck fishtailed, tires screeching. He fought the wheel, heart pounding. Another hit. Metal screamed. He barely managed to swerve onto a dirt path, bouncing over rocks and brush until he lost them in the dark. His truck finally stopped, steam hissing from the hood. Jack sat there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a message. Delgado and Boone weren't going to wait. The line in the sand. When Jack got home, he didn't tell his mother what happened. But he made himself a promise. He wasn't just some poor farmhand anymore. He had something worth fighting for. And if Frank Delgado thought he could scare him off, he was dead wrong. For the first time in his life, Jack Carter wasn't running from his problems. He was ready to fight back. Jack didn't sleep much after the attack. Every creak of the farmhouse made him think Delgado's men were outside, ready to torch the place or worse. By dawn, he had already made up his mind. He needed allies. On his own, he wouldn't last a week. The problem was, in Millstone, trust was as rare as rain in August. An old friend with new problems. Jack's first stop was Tommy Brooks, his childhood friend who now worked as a mechanic on the edge of town. Tommy was greasy, loud, and always in debt, but he had two things Jack needed: tools and no fear of getting his hands dirty. "Jesus, Jack," Tommy said when he saw the dents in Jack's truck. "Looks like somebody tried to kill ya." Jack gave a grim nod. "That's about right. I need your help." Tommy rubbed the back of his neck. "You know I'd do anything for ya, but I'm in trouble myself. Owe money to the wrong folks. They're breathin' down my neck." Jack leaned closer. "Then maybe we help each other. I've got something big, Tommy. Something that can change everything." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "This about that oil I've been hearin' whispers about?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Pressure from both sides. Meanwhile, Delgado was tightening his grip. Men in black Cadillacs started showing up in town more often, buying drinks at the bar, asking questions. Locals were scared to talk, but everyone knew what it meant. Outsiders were circling Jack's land like wolves. Bill Turner, the rancher Jack once worked for, cornered him outside the feed store. "Listen, Carter," he growled. "I don't know what you found out there, but you better sell it quick. Men like Delgado don't ask twice." Jack stared him down. "Maybe I'm done bein' told what to do." Turner spat on the ground. "Then you're a fool. And fools don't last long." Rebecca's warning. Rebecca Hayes called Jack into her office after she got wind of the accident on the road. "They won't stop," she told him flatly. "You've got leverage now, Jack, but leverage only works if you use it right. You need contracts, protection, maybe even federal backing." Jack shook his head. "You think Washington cares about one broke farmer in Texas? Delgado's playin' a different game. He's not gonna sue me, he's gonna bury me." Rebecca's eyes softened, just a little. "Then you better start playin' smart, Jack. Because if you don't, this land won't just cost you money. It'll cost you your life." The first blood. The war truly began 2 nights later. Jack and Tommy were out by the well, checking the soil again, when headlights swept across the field. A truck rolled up fast. Too fast. Before Jack could react, masked men jumped out with bats and chains. "Run!" Jack shouted, grabbing a wrench. The fight was brutal. Jack swung hard, cracking one man across the jaw. Tommy took a chain to the ribs but kept swinging, wild and furious. They managed to drive the men off, but not before Tommy was left bleeding in the dirt, and Jack's barn went up in flames. Jack stood there, chest heaving, as the fire devoured everything his father had built. That was when it hit him. This wasn't about money anymore. It was war. A dangerous idea. The next day, Jack sat with Tommy in the farmhouse kitchen, wrapping his friend's ribs. "We can't win like this," Tommy muttered. "They'll just keep comin' until we're dead." Jack was silent for a long time. Then he said, "What if we take the fight to them?" Tommy blinked. "What the hell you mean?" "I mean," Jack said, voice low, "Delgado and Boone think I'm just some dumb farmhand. Maybe it's time to show 'em I can hit back." Tommy grinned despite the pain. "Now you're talking." The setup. That week, Jack hatched a plan. He leaked word through Earl at the diner that he was ready to sell, ready to sign everything over for cash. It was bait. And Delgado took it. The meeting was set at an abandoned cattle yard on the outskirts of town. Delgado would bring the money. Jack would bring the papers. But Jack wasn't planning on signing anything. The showdown. The night of the meeting was hot and heavy, crickets buzzing in the dark. Jack stood alone in the yard, papers tucked under his arm, his old shotgun hidden just out of sight. Headlights cut through the night as Delgado's Cadillac rolled in. Boone stepped out first, chewing a toothpick, followed by Delgado in his silk shirt and gold tooth gleaming. "Mr. Carter," Delgado said smoothly, "I knew you'd see reason." Jack forced a smile. "Guess we'll see." Delgado snapped his fingers. A briefcase appeared, stuffed with cash. 200,000. More than you'll ever see in your life. "Walk away, and this is yours." Jack looked at the money. Then at his land, stretching dark and endless behind him. "My father built this place," Jack said quietly. "It's all I've got left. And you think I'm gonna sell it to a vulture like you?" Delgado's smile faded. Boone reached under his jacket. Jack raised his shotgun. "Don't." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The night was electric with tension. Then, chaos. The night was thick with humidity, the kind that pressed against the skin like a damp cloth. Jack sat at the head of a wooden table inside the cabin, lit only by a single overhead bulb that swung slightly in the breeze from the cracked window. Around him sat his crew: Mikey, Sarah, Big Joe, and 3 new faces he had recruited over the last few weeks. They were running numbers, counting out stacks of cash, guns laid casually across the table as if they were just tools of the trade. But Jack's mind wasn't on the money. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was whispering in Delgado's ear. The cartel boss had been moving faster, striking closer to Jack's territory, as if he knew every step Jack was about to take. "Someone's leaking," Jack finally muttered, his eyes scanning each face at the table. Mikey shifted uncomfortably, scratching his neck. Big Joe looked up from his cigarette, his eyes narrowed. Sarah stayed calm, but her lips pressed into a tight line. Jack slammed his palm on the table, making the cash bounce. "I'm not playing games here. Somebody in this room is selling us out." The silence was suffocating. No one spoke. The first blood. 2 nights later, Jack's suspicion proved true. They had planned a quiet pickup at the docks. 2 vans, a clean handoff, no problems. But as soon as they rolled up, floodlights blazed to life and bullets ripped through the air. Delgado's men poured out from behind shipping containers, AK-47s spraying the night. "Ambush!" Big Joe roared, pulling his shotgun from the van. Jack dove behind a stack of crates, returning fire with his Glock. Mikey was screaming, firing wildly into the dark, while Sarah stayed low, picking her shots with cold precision. The firefight was chaos. Sparks exploded off metal containers, glass shattered, engines roared. Jack felt the sting of a bullet grazing his arm, the heat of death brushing past him. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Jack's new recruits were dead. Mikey was bleeding from his leg. The shipment was gone. Delgado's men had vanished like shadows. Jack stood over the bodies of his men, his hands trembling with rage. His empire wasn't just under attack, it was bleeding from the inside. The whisper of betrayal. Back at the cabin, Jack confronted his crew again. His voice was cold, sharp enough to cut steel. Somebody tipped them off. They knew everything: where, when, how. That doesn't happen by chance. Sarah spoke first. "Maybe Delgado just has eyes everywhere. He's got half the city in his pocket." But Jack shook his head. "No. This was too clean. Too perfect. Someone here is feeding him." His eyes locked on Mikey. The kid couldn't meet his gaze. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. Jack's chest tightened. Mikey, the kid he had pulled out of nothing, the kid he trusted, could he be the rat? The turning point. The breaking point came a week later. Jack was supposed to meet a new contact in the old rail yard. He took Mikey with him, maybe as a test, maybe because he wanted to believe he was wrong. But as soon as they stepped onto the cracked pavement, Jack saw the glint of scopes in the distance. Snipers. "Mikey," Jack whispered, his hand sliding toward his gun. Mikey froze. His face went pale. That was all Jack needed. "You set me up," Jack growled. "I had no choice." Mikey blurted out, his voice shaking. "Delgado, he said he'd kill me, kill my family." Jack's heart split in two. This was the kid who had followed him from the start, the one who had believed in him when no one else did. And now, here he was, standing in the shadows of betrayal. Gunfire erupted around them. Jack dove for cover, but his eyes never left Mikey. Blood spills. The rail yard turned into a slaughterhouse. Jack fought like a man possessed, bullets ripping through enemies as he clawed his way out of the trap. But Mikey stayed frozen, caught between guilt and fear. At the end of it, Delgado's men lay scattered across the ground, but Mikey was still standing there, shaking, tears in his eyes. "Jack." "I'm sorry," he whispered. Jack raised his gun. His finger hovered on the trigger, his chest heaving. Every instinct screamed at him to pull it, to end the betrayal with blood. But he hesitated. In that hesitation, Mikey bolted into the shadows, disappearing into the night. The cost of mercy. Jack staggered back to his truck, bloodied and exhausted. For the first time, he felt the weight of everything crushing him. His empire was cracking, his enemies closing in, and the one person he had trusted most had just stabbed him in the back. As he lit a cigarette with shaking hands, he muttered to himself, "Mercy is weakness, and weakness gets you killed." From that night on, Jack knew there was no turning back. The city never slept, but it groaned under the weight of men like Jack and Delgado. Neon lights bled into the night, illuminating streets where cops turned blind eyes, politicians cashed bribes, and blood washed into the gutters like rainwater. Jack stood on the balcony of a high-rise apartment overlooking downtown, cigarette glowing between his fingers. Below, the skyline flickered with sirens. He was no longer the hungry street hustler who clawed his way up. Now, he was something else, a man forged in betrayal, sharpened by war. But the wound Mikey left still burned. Sarah stepped onto the balcony, a glass of whiskey in her hand. She didn't say a word at first. She just stood beside him, the city lights painting her face in fragments. Finally, she spoke. "You should have killed him, Jack." Jack exhaled smoke, his eyes fixed on the skyline. "Maybe I should have. But killing him wouldn't have erased what he did. It would have just made me weaker. Delgado wants me angry. Wants me sloppy." Sarah studied him. "So what now?" Jack crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, his jaw set like iron. "Now we make the city bleed. The storm begins." Jack's retaliation was swift and merciless. Delgado's drug labs in the industrial district burned to the ground. His safe houses in the suburbs riddled with bullets, bodies left as warnings. His street soldiers dragged into alleys and disappeared into the night. Jack's crew hit Delgado's empire like a hammer, blow after blow, until the cartel boss was forced into the open. But with every strike, the police tightened their grip. Politicians who once looked away began whispering Jack's name with fear. He was no longer just a player. He was a warlord, and the city was choking on the violence. Delgado strikes back. One night, Jack's crew gathered at the cabin, planning their next move. Big Joe was laughing, cracking open a beer, when the windows shattered inward. Grenades! The explosion ripped through the room, shattering wood and bone alike. Fire engulfed the cabin as men screamed. Jack crawled through the smoke, ears ringing, blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. He saw Big Joe lying on the floor, chest torn open. Sarah was dragging herself across the ground, coughing, covered in dust and blood. Delgado's men swarmed the ruins, finishing off the survivors with cold precision. Jack pulled Sarah behind what was left of a wall, his gun spitting fire until the barrel clicked empty. They barely escaped into the night, the cabin burning behind them, a graveyard for half of Jack's empire. The last line of loyalty. In the aftermath, Jack's crew was in shambles. Only a handful of men remained. The city smelled blood in the water, and smaller gangs began circling, eager to carve up what was left of Jack's territory. Sarah confronted him. Her voice was raw, her eyes hollow. "This war is killing us, Jack. Every step we take, Delgado's one step ahead. And Mikey, you think he's out there, just hiding? No. He's with Delgado now, feeding him every move we make." Jack's fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked. "If Mikey's with Delgado, then I'll put him in the ground myself." The encounter. A week later, Jack got his chance. Through whispers on the street, he learned of a cartel drop happening at an abandoned factory on the edge of town. It was risky, probably a setup, but Jack couldn't resist. He and Sarah went in under the cover of night. The factory loomed like a corpse, rust and shadows swallowing its walls. Inside, they found crates of weapons, and Mikey. The kid was thinner, his eyes hollowed out, but his gun was steady in his hands. Behind him, Delgado's men fanned out, rifles raised. "Jack!" Mikey's voice cracked, but he didn't lower the gun. "It doesn't have to end like this." Jack stepped forward, his own gun drawn, but his voice was calm, almost cold. "It already has." For a moment, time froze. Jack's finger hovered on the trigger. Mikey's lips trembled. Delgado's men waited. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire thundered through the factory. Sarah dropped 2 men before they even fired. Jack tore through the others, bullets ripping through crates and steel. Mikey fired back, not at Jack, but at Delgado's soldiers, his loyalty tearing itself in two. When the smoke cleared, Delgado's men were dead. Sarah was bleeding from her shoulder. And Mikey lay on the ground, clutching his stomach, blood pooling beneath him. "Jack," he whispered, his voice fading. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Jack knelt beside him, eyes burning. For all the blood, all the betrayal, this was still the kid he had raised from nothing. Mikey's last breath rattled in his chest before his eyes went still. The weight of power. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The city was closing in. Jack stood over Mikey's body, Sarah leaning against him for support, her blood soaking his shirt. "This is the price," Jack muttered, his voice low, almost to himself. "The price of power. Everyone you love, everyone you trust, they all burn." The factory doors groaned as he pushed them open. Ahead, the night stretched endless, dark, hungry. Delgado was still out there. The war wasn't over. But Jack knew one thing now. He wasn't fighting for money, or power, or territory. He was fighting to bury Delgado with his bare hands. And nothing, police, politicians, even the city itself, was going to stop him. The city was bleeding. Bullets rattled in alleys, bodies lay forgotten on sidewalks, and whispers of Jack Malone's name carried through every dive bar, strip club, and backroom. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a ghost, a myth. Some swore he was dead, others swore he couldn't be killed. But Jack was alive, barely. He sat in a dim apartment, Sarah's bloodied bandage peeking from beneath her shirt as she loaded a pistol with shaking hands. The air smelled of gun oil and whiskey. Jack lit a cigarette, the flame catching the sharpness of his eyes. "Delgado's got half the city in his pocket. But I don't need half. I just need the right half." Sarah's hand trembled as she set the pistol down. "You're bleeding men, Jack. We've buried more bodies in the last month than in the last 5 years combined. And the cops. They're not turning a blind eye anymore. They want you in a cage, or in a coffin." Jack exhaled smoke, slow and steady. "Then we give them coffins. Just not ours." The Council of Wolves. Jack called a meeting. Not with his own crew, they were too few now, but with the wolves of the city. He sat at the head of a long, scarred table in the back of a shuttered nightclub. Around him, the Chinatown triads, the Irish mob, the Russian syndicate, even a biker gang that once wanted him dead. Every man in the room wanted a piece of Delgado, but none trusted each other. The air was heavy, every glance sharp as a blade. Jack leaned forward, his voice cutting through the smoke, and murmurs, "You all hate me. I know it. I've stolen your turf, your money, your men. But right now, we've got one enemy that wants us all in the ground. Delgado isn't here to share. He's here to bury. And if you think you'll survive by waiting him out, you're already dead." The Russians muttered. The Irishman spat on the floor. But the Triad boss raised a glass. "You want us to fight your war, Malone?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "No. I want us to fight our war. And when Delgado's gone, we settle the score. But until then, we make this city a graveyard for him and anyone wearing his colors." For a moment, silence. Then, slowly, glasses clinked, heads nodded. The wolves had agreed. Delgado's shadow. But Delgado was no fool. From his mansion fortress outside the city, he watched with cold precision as his empire tightened. He had politicians feeding him intel, cops tipping him off, and mercenaries flown in from across the border. And in his pocket, he still had the one thing Jack didn't: fear. Wherever Delgado's name was spoken, men hesitated. His reputation stretched beyond the city, and his cruelty was legend. Entire families had vanished for crossing him. He wasn't just a boss. He was a curse. When news reached him that Jack was building alliances, Delgado didn't panic. He smiled. "Let him gather his dogs," he told his lieutenants. "All the better when I burn them together." Blood in the streets. The city erupted into war. Biker gangs roared through downtown, spraying Delgado's convoys with bullets. Russian gunmen stormed warehouses, burning cartel shipments to ash. The Triad slit throats in the backrooms of casinos. And Jack was everywhere. He hit Delgado's nightclubs with Molotovs, hijacked his drug trucks on the freeway, left bodies hanging from bridges with signs that read, "The city belongs to Malone." But Delgado struck back harder. Police raids started hitting Jack's allies. The Irish boss was found with his tongue cut out. A biker crew was ambushed and buried alive in a construction site. Every victory Jack won cost him twice as much. Sarah's breaking point. One night, after a bloody ambush that left 3 of Jack's men dead, Sarah confronted him. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she shoved him against a wall. "Look at us, Jack. Look at what we've become. You talk about building an empire, about taking back the city, but all I see are bodies. Mikey's gone. Big Joe's gone. Half the men who trusted you are rotting in the ground." Jack grabbed her wrists, his voice sharp, almost desperate. "And if I stop now, Sarah, what then? Delgado wins. He takes everything. He'll come for you, for me, for anyone who ever stood beside us. There's no turning back. Not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then when does it end?" Jack released her, his jaw tight. "When Delgado's buried. Not before." The trap. Weeks later, Jack got word. Delgado himself was coming into the city. A rare move, meant to show strength. He'd be meeting his lieutenants at a luxury hotel, guarded by a small army. Sarah begged him not to go. "It's a trap, Jack. He wants you to come." Jack loaded his rifle, the steel cold in his hands. "Good. Because I'm done waiting." The Hotel Inferno. The night Delgado came, the city held its breath. Jack and his men stormed the hotel in a blaze of gunfire. Glass shattered, chandeliers fell, blood painted the marble floors. Delgado's mercenaries fought like wolves, but Jack carved a path through them with rage in his veins. On the top floor, he kicked open the suite door, only to find it empty. Delgado wasn't there. Instead, a laptop sat on the table, its screen glowing. Delgado's face filled the display, smiling with venom. "You think you hunt me, Malone? No. You've been dancing in my palm the whole time. While you bleed my soldiers, I bleed your city. While you fight for scraps, I take the throne." Jack's fists clenched, his chest heaving. Delgado leaned closer to the camera. "Enjoy your little war, Jack. Because by the time it ends, there won't be a city left to rule." The feed cut to black. Behind Jack, the hotel shook, explosives rigged in the walls detonated, fire swallowing the building. The escape. Jack barely made it out alive. Flames licked the night sky as he and Sarah staggered into the street, coughing smoke. His men were dead, the alliance shattered, the city burning. For the first time, Jack felt it, the cold edge of defeat. But as he stared at the inferno, his teeth clenched, and a fire rose in his chest. Delgado wasn't untouchable. He was just a man. A man who hid behind money, fear, and soldiers. And Jack swore, in the heart of that burning street, that he would drag him into the light and end him, no matter the cost. The desert was silent. The same desert where Jack once found the first drops of oil that changed his fate forever. Now, it was just dust, heat, and the faint smell of burned gasoline from battles fought years ago. Jack Harper's empire no longer cast the same shadow it once did. The refineries still ran, the money still flowed, but the man who had built it all was gone. Whether dead in the desert or vanished into the shadows, no one knew for certain. Some swore they saw his body dragged into a shallow grave after the final gunfight. Others claimed he escaped, living quietly under a false name in South America, drinking cheap rum and staring at the ocean until the end of his days. But legends don't need truth. Legends feed on mystery. The aftermath. Marcus, the loyal friend turned reluctant enemy, sat alone in a dim bar outside Houston. He nursed a glass of bourbon, the weight of guilt heavy in his eyes. He had betrayed Jack once, forced by fear and the squeeze of Delgado's cartel, but in the end, Marcus had pulled the trigger on the man who was about to kill Jack. Betrayal and loyalty intertwined like barbed wire around his soul. Sometimes, drunk and half asleep, Marcus heard Jack's voice. "Never trust anyone completely. Not even me." Jack had said that years ago, back when everything was just beginning. Marcus would raise his glass to the empty air and mutter, "I didn't, brother. I didn't." The family's silence. Back in the small farmhouse where Jack was born, his mother lived in silence. She had watched her son become both a king and a killer. To the neighbors, she said little, only that Jack was gone. The walls of the house were lined with pictures, a boy holding a fishing rod, a teenager in a worn-out cap, and a young man with hard eyes that seemed to know more about the world than they should. Money came every month. Enough to keep the lights on, enough to fix the roof. No one ever knew from where. Some whispered it was Jack's last act of protection, a hidden fund left for his mother. Others said it was Marcus trying to buy forgiveness. But the old woman never touched the money. She kept living off the land, the way Jack once dreamed they would. The streets remember. In the city, whispers of Jack Harper still lingered in the back alleys and smoky card rooms. He became a ghost story told to young hustlers. He came from nothing. Dirt poor. Then he touched oil, and turned it black with blood. He had it all, until the wolves ate him alive. That's what power does. That's what greed does. Some admired him, a man who outsmarted the rich and stood toe-to-toe with the cartel. Others cursed his name, blaming him for bloodshed and broken lives. But no one forgot him. The legacy. The wells still pumped. His company, fractured and carved apart by rivals, survived in pieces. Some fields were now controlled by foreign investors, others by Delgado's remnants. Yet, on one particular stretch of desert land, an old pump jack kept working under the blazing sun. Rusted, squeaking, stubborn, like the man who once stood beside it. There was a rumor that Jack had left everything, his land, his wealth, even his name, to a child no one knew he had. Some said the boy lived somewhere in California under a different surname, shielded from the shadows of the past. If true, one day that child would inherit not just money, but the weight of a story soaked in oil and blood. The last image. Years later, a drifter walking through the desert claimed he saw something strange. On a lonely ridge, beneath a twisted mesquite tree, there stood a wooden cross with no name. At its base, half buried in sand, was a gold lighter engraved with the initials J.H. No one could say who put it there. But for those who once walked with Jack Harper, it was enough. Enough to believe that the man who clawed his way from dirt to empire, from nothing to everything, had finally found silence in the dust. Final lines. Jack's story was never about money. It was about the cost of chasing it. He bought power, but paid with blood. He gained the world, but lost himself. In the end, there was only dust, oil, and the echo of a man who burned too brightly, too fast. Jack Harper. Farmer. King. Ghost. His empire stood on shadows. And like all shadows, it faded.